Time for some reaction content. FabFilter introduced FabFilter Pro-R2, and now there is finally an introduction video with Dan Worrell.
Hi, and
At this point I already know that I want to buy this plugin because Dan Worrell has narrated it. No, just kidding. I mean, in the past, FabFilter have been like the heroes of plugin development in some sense because they made basically the stock plugins of everyone. Pro-Q, Pro-C, Pro-L, Pro-MB, Saturn, and all of the other stuff. At least those are the ones that I like to use. Volcano as well. So, I mean, they've been really important. Well, Pro-R, it's not something that I have been a big fan of. I didn't buy it because I thought to myself, okay, reverb is very subjective and I don't really need to have a pre-EQ and a post-EQ in the plugin or whatever that is. Or like, oh no, wait, one of these EQs is the length of each frequency, right? Okay, so it's kind of a damping thing. I mean, that's kind of cool, but I definitely didn't need it. And yeah, I want to find out if Pro-R2 has something that kind of convinces me that I need another reverb. And there is only one person who could convince me, and that is Dan Worrell, because Dan Worrell always has some extremely creative ideas that he expresses in his videos and also in the videos that he makes for FabFilter. And my hair is not made because I just came out of the shower, but still I want to be here now. And yeah, I think we are just going to watch this now and see what we can find. And yeah, the big challenge here is that the interface of Pro-R doesn't really give away that there is a new feature.
welcome to this introduction to Pro-R2, the latest update to FabFilter.
I mean, we still have like the same amount of knobs in the top interface and the same EQs in the bottom. So, you know, it's not very clear immediately what this thing really adds. Pre-delay, space, we had that. Distance, I mean, that's kind of like space, but a bit different, I guess. Thickness, maybe that is some sort of distortion thing. Character might be something like that as well. Or maybe it is a pitch shifter for some shimmer reverb, I don't know, brightness. That sounds like it's just an exciter maybe. Width is pretty standard. Ducking is also pretty standard and also often not needed in a reverb because just applying a manual post compressor usually works better, but I mean, let's find out.
This reverb plugin. Let's start with an upright piano. This is a very evocative sound, but the memories it evokes might depend very much on the acoustic space it's in. If I dial in a small room and turn down the brightness and bring the source closer, the sound might remind you of childhood piano lessons in a living room. But with a larger space and a brighter response and a bit more distance, it might start to evoke memories of hymns sung in a school hall.
He surely knows how to sell something. Like, these were already two like very emotional use case examples. And that's also interesting for me as a content creator because there are always multiple layers to how you explain a certain feature. There is the super straightforward, I explain you technically what this is feature, like distance, whatever. Maybe it's some binaural panning thing that pushes things further away with some filter. But then there is also like the use case a layer where you are like making an argument of how you can use it in your music. For example, or you have two tracks and you need one of them to go a little bit out of the way so that the other one has more room to breathe or something like that. But I would say Dan Worrell here went even one step further, and instead of talking about technical things or how the project behaves, he just talks about the emotion that you want to create with the music, and that's the thing that counts most. And yeah, that's really something that we could learn a lot from everyone here on YouTube. Okay, let's go on.
If I make it really bright and really long,
Nice
I can
ambient.
create an ethereal, unreal sounding ambience.
I gotta say, these visuals with the foggy wave, they do make me feel the reverb really. So I would say that the interface that FabFilter came up with really serves this purpose. But Pro-R already had this interface in the first version, if I am not mistaken. So I don't know. That's also not the revolution here, is it?
Let's make it richer and more complex by adding more modulation with the character knob. This has a completely different emotional impact to the first small room setting I started with. Let's hit that freeze button and keep that reverb tail circulating forever.
Now that was a bit of a technical feature drop. He usually went on with emotions and stuff, and then suddenly be like, "Oh, by the way, there is a freeze button. Pew! Fancy, isn't it?" Yeah, he just can't not do it, because I know that Dan is a big fan of just the technical side of things. And yeah, he is maybe a little bit all over the place, some technical stuff, some emotional stuff, but he will never just not explain anything technical. It's always some component of technical nerdiness in it, and that's just how I love his videos. Yeah.
Now, of course, good sounding digital reverb is not a new thing. It's been around long enough that we have revered vintage hardware units. But those old digital boxes' reputation for great sounding reverb is almost matched by their reputation for being difficult to program, with many obscurely named parameters and many opportunities to create bad sounding settings.
That is true. Recently I've been discussing this in the Cubase Nutzergruppe Deutschland on Facebook, where people always insist that the stock plugins of Cubase are allegedly good. And yeah, and one of these people who said that I was talking shit, that the plugins are bad, was and I was asking this person, like, give me some examples of plugins of Cubase that you really like. And he said, well, a lot of people like my music, and I use a lot of stock plugins, so that can be bad. Also, I use the maximizer a lot and the reverbs. And I was like, okay, good, the maximizer, I can understand that. That's something that I've overused quite a lot for a while. But the reverbs, they have a lot of cryptically named parameters, and the sound is pretty generic anyway. Like, this reverb has just a few parameters, and it sounds really great already, I think. So apparently it is possible to get away with less parameters and still a great sound and lots of control. But yeah, that's something that not everyone understands apparently.
Reverb is perhaps the best example of the maxim, more controls.
Or maybe that person was just not experienced yet. Maybe they just don't have a reverb like this yet. That might also be. I don't want to pretend like they were stupid or anything. Sometimes it's just a lack of experience.
Does not equal more control. Under the hood, we have hundreds of individual delay taps, each with their own feedback, level, pan, filtering, diffusion, and so on. If a reverb gave us individual control over every one of those internal parameters, it would be totally unusable in practice.
Yeah.
So the challenge, when designing a reverb, is to find a way to map those thousands of internal parameters to just a handful of meaningful macro control.
Okay, so at the moment, he is justifying why we don't see a new main feature in this plugin. Because he knows that, and FabFilter also knows that everyone who's watching this video was already thinking to themselves, what's actually new here? And that's the question that I asked as well in the beginning of this video. And now Dan Worrell tries to make a point here that it is not really about if there is factually a new feature, but it is about if the features that already existed have been refined even more to improve the workflow even more. And that makes kind of sense, because FabFilter was always known for revolutionizing workflows, not for coming up with a new DSP ID in general. Like even Pro-R2, like their most iconic plugin, it is just a bunch of filters. It's not crazy DSP. It is just well-engineered workflow. So yeah, I would say while it does feel a little bit like an excuse because we were waiting for something special, it also kind of makes sense. It is just the FabFilter style of solving a problem. Okay, let's go on.
Which maximize the good sounding settings combinations and minimize the bad sounding ones. When a designer gets that right,
excuse me, but I want to scroll through the video a little bit because I want to find out if there is still something else than just this explanation.
Easily fine-tune. Listen to the way this short reverb setting changes the brightness of this acoustic guitar. And spreading out those high-frequency transients. In this browser, which we first saw in their Twin 3 synth, we can tag favorite.
Okay, I'm not a big fan of tagging favorites in a preset browser because I don't like to commit to a preset like that, because I have made the experience throughout all the years of making music that sometimes a sound that I didn't like sometimes for years suddenly pops up and it suddenly makes sense to me, and it's just, oh, how could I not have seen how good this sound is before, and suddenly I overuse it massively. And if I think if I committed to giving things stars, no matter if samples or presets, that might kind of interfere with this sensation and make me feel like, oh, this thing doesn't have a star, it cannot be good, I must be fooled right now with my ears. Usually I'm not a fan of being all like, oh, use your ears and stuff, but when it comes to this favoritized feature, I really don't see that as like something that adds something to my workflow or something. But yeah, it's a nice preset browser. It sorts the presets by size and then like by kind of room type. That makes sense for a reverb, yeah.
It's now with which I can do that in the FabFilter reverb early. This controls the balance between early and late stages.
Alright, now we are at the technical stage of the video.
But also the way the former hands over to the latter. And it changes the overall envelope of the reverb. Bring the part closer, and the reverb starts almost immediately with a noticeable transient.
Something that I always wanted to know is, why do we have to accept reverbs starting too late? Like also Valhalla Supermassive, a super loved reverb for very many reasons, because Valhalla just knows how to make good reverbs. But whenever I dial in a setting that I really like, it just starts way too late, because you have to use the delay button for that. And it's not just the pre-delay, but it's also in the feedback path of the reverb. And I'm always like, dude, I just want to have it in the feedback path. I don't want a single pre-delay. And if I wanted one, then I would add a delay before the reverb. Yeah. And yeah, of course, some kind of topologies in the reverb like force you to have some sort of delay at the beginning, because the energy of the reverb has to build up before it can really reveal itself. I do understand that, but then I'm wondering, why are there no look ahead features in the reverb? Why can't I just say, okay, I want this to be, mixed with a dry signal, but with a bit of negative delay to compensate for it? Why can a pre-delay only be positive? Especially FabFilter, the ones who improved the workflows, and they were probably desperately searching for something to add to the plugin that would kind of bring it to the next level. They could have added a feature like that, and it would already do so much, I think. Oh, and I would make a plugin like that myself if I had good reverb algorithms, but they take a long time to develop, and I have some other plans what I want to do next, so that's why I'm just saying someone else should do it, just so you know. It's not that I'm complaining about everyone while being able to do it myself. I don't have time right now, or else I would.
Or push it further away, and the reverb will bloom in more gradually. Likewise, the simple-seeming brightness control changes the sound in very complex and profound ways. Not at all like EQing the reverb, which of course you can do as well.
Yeah, of course, it is not just a post EQ. If it was, then you could solve it with this thing. I guess it is an exciter, or maybe something in the feedback path. Maybe saturation. Saturation can also dull the signal when it's turned to the left here. Oh, makes sense.
The blue curve isn't actually EQ. This offsets the reverb decay time, so you can make specific frequencies reverberate longer. or damp them down to make them shorter. Up to 6
Yeah, we had this feature already in the past.
of use EQ band, which is a very powerful option.
Okay, they added all of the EQ features that they already had. I mean, that's also not unexpected.
Formats.
I gotta say, FabFilter has to have a really hard time coming up with new features now that they already had like so many features invented and standardized throughout music production that it's getting hard for them to still come up with something groundbreaking. And we have to respect that, of course. It's not easy. It's not trivial.
Remarkably, you get all
Still, I want them to succeed. I want them to continue to succeed just because they kind of deserve it for having already done so much for everyone. I would not be happy if they now just ran out of ideas and had to close their studio. That would kind of suck. Like, there are so many developers who made lamer stuff and were more successful than FabFilter. But FabFilter has always been just an honest innovator. I want them to continue doing that.
all the same options for the decay curve as well, giving you huge amounts of control over the way the reverb behaves and options of to the main reverb.
Okay, I gotta say, I'm not really interested in like surround sound and Dolby Atmos and all that, but let's see what this is real quickly.
Reverb parameters at the top, which will be highlighted when you hover over the corresponding slider. Turning these sliders up will increase that parameter for the front of the room, which I've panned left for this example, while reducing it for the rear, currently panned right.
Okay. Yeah, again, I'm not very interested in surround settings. No one has surround sound systems at home, except like maybe people who make films or watch films, and I'm not even doing that a lot. I like some animes, but I usually don't even watch them because I don't like when people die or when it's kind of cringe. So basically almost all the time. But I like the other parts.
On maybe else impulse I want to show you actually. I grabbed this years ago in a former synagogue turned museum where I recorded a choir on location.
Oh yeah, sweet. Making your own impulse responses is a lot of fun.
And I really like the warmth and depth it can add.
Yeah, load it in.
Impulse to use preset pulse. But instead of loading a preset, I'll import.
Wait, why do we have to click on import IR in the menu? This should just be a simple drag and drop.
That Jewish museum impulse. And
if it's not a simple drag and drop, then I ask FabFilter, what are you doing? You are the workflow guys. You have to come up with these things. This is exactly what you are known for. But maybe he just chose the menu because some people use their DAWs in administration mode, or as an administrator, in which case drag and drop doesn't work on Windows. And yeah, that can confuse a lot of people and make them rely on menus. Still, there should be a drag and drop option for sure.
Now we've got Pro-R2's interpretation of it. It's not identical, granted, but it has the same kind of flavor.
Okay, that's cool, because this is just like Synplant, where you import a sample and get a synthesizer, but here you import a sample and get a reverb texture as algorithmic reverb. I'm not even sure if this also uses AI or if it's just some clever algorithm. I think it's an algorithm thing because it doesn't give you a lot of different options, and also it was very fast when he imported that, unless it was edited, the video I mean. But I don't think so. No, it should be possible to do this algorithmically. But I mean, just like musically speaking, this feature really belongs to this new Synplant thing, and I like that. That's pretty cool. It means I can make an impulse response and then further tweak it in Pro-R2. That's something that I'm actually a little bit interested in.
Actually, we can probably get closer to the impulse by turning down the character knob and removing any modulation from the tail.
Okay, character is modulation. That's pretty cool because impulse responses are always just the thing that they are and nothing else. And modulation is usually the thing that drives people to not use convolution reverb, but like an algorithmic one, because so that they can make a little bit more, add a little bit more randomness and a chorus into the whole thing. And being able to convert an impulse response to something algorithmic would bring this workflow to bring both worlds together. And I don't know, yeah, that's kind of cool.
However, the ability to add movement via modulation is one of the biggest differences between algorithmic and convolution reverbs.
Yeah, he says the same thing.
So we can also adjust the new thickness control. Turn this up to increase the density of reflections, which might help to match the sound of an impulse captured in a real room. Or you might prefer to turn it down instead and create a more sparse pattern of reflections, which might colour the dry signal less and leave more space in your mix.
I want to know what's up with this thing up here. Are there different modes for character and thickness or what?
Or of course we can make more profound changes like the room size, or the distance.
This gives me some interesting ideas. For example, I could record the room that I'm sitting in here, which is a living room, by the way, and I could make the space really long to kind of emphasize on the character of the living room, and I could finally listen to what my living room would sound like if it was like the same reverb texture, but extremely long, which just makes no sense, but I could test it. That's kind of fancy.
Hard room sound using the modern style, which we know from version 1. But the
Okay, now he's going to talk about the different reverb styles that have been added. I think in Pro-R1 there was just one style, and now there are multiple styles, and that's kind of cool because just like in Pro C and in Saturn, it all started with just a few modes, and then they added more modes for the next version. And I'm still on Saturn 1, but for example I have Pro C2, and I know that it was a big difference from Pro C1 to Pro C2. They also added the pumping curve that is very useful for sidechain compressing kick and bass. Excuse me. Yeah, and I think it makes a lot of sense to also bring this whole concept to reverbs, because every time you just make a full new algorithm that maps to all of the parameters that are there, you kind of duplicate the whole plugin functionality every time with every new mode that you make, and that's very powerful. Very powerful way to make the functionality bigger.
vintage classic reverbs I referred to earlier didn't sound much like this. They had limited bandwidth due to lower sample rates and naive delay interpolation, and were limited to short delay times which had to be disguised with modulation. So let's switch to the vintage
No user ever knows what delay interpolation is, but it definitely sounds cool.
style instead. And what a difference that makes.
Definitely a nice sound on these drums, but I don't like the drums in general. Like, I'm not a big fan of the 80s and stuff.
This reverb.
Sorry, I'm a big fan of some of the 80s stuff, like Yellow Magic Orchestra. But that's a good reason for not liking the other 80s stuff, because they were some of the only ones in the 80s who didn't throw a huge reverb on the snare every time they could, but they were just making cool electronic music that was timeless. And yeah, that makes a bit of a difference. So I'm a bit of a fan of the 80s for how they composed music. It was very melodic and stuff, but I'm not a big fan of all of the people who really exposed the key elements of that time,
While being much less convincingly like a real space, just sounds good. Reverbs use plates different ways compared to a three-dimensional room, so plates have a unique kind of character once again.
Okay, the plate one also sounds a lot like the 80s, so they have a bit of something in common. They are both cool though.
Can be great in case of the gate feature. This is a simplified gate with automatic threshold and, of course, tempo sync options for the hold time.
I like the tempo sync options for the whole time, but then, you know, with this super precise length, I would kind of appreciate a MIDI input feature to trigger the gate, so that I can be extremely precise with it, so that it replaces this automatic onset detection, which might fail at some points. That would be kind of cool. That would actually make me use a reverb with the gate, even though I just said that it was kind of cringe how the 80s did it too much. But I could imagine it on some other things than just snares.
In a similar...
Here it doesn't make any sense because there is this ghost note and then suddenly this reverb that is an eighth note long is kind of going over the one of the bar and stopping on the next 16th. But yeah, we get the idea, Dan.
In a manner, we have a ducking control, which turns the dramatic threshold against routings using a raw sawtooth with the character turned all the way down. Now notice how the sound changes when I turn up the character knob. We get a gentle, swirly kind of movement. Or rich DJ.
Wait, how did he get there? Why now character and not ducking? He was just about to explain the ducking. I was kind of expecting a kick to pop up or something.
It's a much more... It sounds dark due to the way the... It's gentle.
I'm just skipping all this, not just because my video is getting pretty long, but it doesn't seem like new information at this point. He's just playing with the character knob again, and he did that already before.
Early again, reverb and modulate the vintage style. One which, like, sometimes you just want to add. You just need to be a bit careful with it.
That's a cool reverb sound indeed.
That I've also done for the mid mix. Hints to get pop-up descriptions of controls when you hover your cursor over them.
No. Adding tooltips is not something to end your video with, Dan. But I think it's not your fault. It's kind of the plugin's fault, to be honest. Because usually Dan Worrell's videos end with some extremely sick technique, like the time when he made all these videos about parallel bandpass filters. It was always the case that you watched like half an hour of him talking about parallel bandpass filters and you already thought that you have heard everything. But then at the end of the video, he just threw another thing out of there, and it was like one of the most incredible things ever in all of these videos. And he was always like, "Oh, that we don't have time for that anymore, maybe next time." And then the video ended when he was just about to say something about the most insane stuff ever, and that's usually something that I expect in his videos, but here he ended it with saying that we can see the tooltips if we want to. And yeah, I think he did that because there was really not much more to say about this reverb. He also started repeating himself a little bit at the end, just checking out different settings on different sounds and so on. It got a little bit boring. Maybe this video should have ended around here when he was done with the ducking thing. 10 minutes or 11. Sounds nice. It doesn't always have to be a long video. And I think it takes away a little bit of the quality of the plugin to just keep on talking at that point. Because that will just leave the impression that, oh, there is not much to talk about. You cannot talk about it longer than 15 minutes. Then the plugin cannot be as good. At least that's how it made me feel like in the end. But now I have to actively remember the things that actually mattered, which was that there were multiple reverb modes, which is cool. Importing impulse responses to convert them into algorithmic reverbs, which is cool. What was the other thing? Like, okay, so these three parameters, which are just a great way of controlling the reverb texture in general, is cool. What was the other thing? I mean, of course, the whole EQ features that have already been there before are cool. The auto gate, the fact that it's tempo sync is kind of cool, even though the features were very limited, not even a threshold. The ducking also has not like a lot of parameters that would be very useful. One knobs, easy to use, but sometimes it would be cool to make a pop-up with the other parameters. Just like when you are hovering a filter node, you can also get the additional parameters that are not available on the node itself. Just the same way we could perceive knobs as just the overall thing with additional features available if we wanted to. And I think FabFilter could do that somewhat in a way that would feel very good if they wanted to. So yeah, Pro-R2. I think it is definitely a cool reverb. I'm still not sure if I want to buy it. I think if I would buy it, then because of the impulse response feature, because I just love innovative stuff. I love throwing stuff at other stuff and then it becomes stuff that it wasn't able to become before, just like in Synplant. So that's something that would fascinate me, but I don't know if it's enough. I do have reverbs. It would be a bit of a gimmicky thing if I got it, I think. I'm not sure. But still, yeah, that's my reaction content.